Hello again, everybody. This is Brant Brinkerhoff from Ash Games, and today we are answering questions about the artwork in Oros. And we've got a few questions out there, and we're going to let's just jump right into it. So, question number 1. It says, I've been really interested in trying digital art, but I do not know where to start. Are there any good tablets you'd recommend, software, etc.? That's an interesting question, especially asking someone like myself. So in terms of tablets, especially if you're doing digital artwork, a tablet is invaluable. I, however, do not use a tablet. I have used them in the past. I definitely prefer the tablets that actually have the screen right on the tablet, so you feel like you're actually drawing right there on the space, rather than having to make that disconnected connection from a screen that's out in front of you and then a tablet and down. But I don't actually use a tablet when I illustrate. And the reason is because I'm left-handed, actually, is the reason why I don't ever end up using a tablet. And so that may sound a little strange, but if you think of how you do design work or illustration work, it's much like playing an instrument. I always relate it to like playing a guitar. So like with a guitar, one hand is making chord formations and doing all of the movement, but the other one is also picking and strumming and doing other movements, right? So those two things are doing two different things at the same time, and together they create a sound. And it's the same thing when you're doing design work. Your right hand is managing the mouse and doing a lot of the finesse of whatever's happening and getting you around, but the left hand is responsible for all of the keys and the hotkeys and changing the tools. And so in order to work efficiently, your left hand has to be pretty adept, and you have to have memorized a whole bunch of different keystrokes to be able to change things and work, at the same pace that your brain is processing information. And that's kind of the ideal, right? Because that's the way to efficiently work. When it comes to illustrating, because I'm left-handed, I need to be able to hold the little stylus in my left hand. But my left hand is trained to do all of the keys and the key commands. And so it's always been this really rough thing where I've tried again and again and tried to figure out a way to make this work and not get frustrated because things are just going so slow and I can't get it to work right. And so ultimately I've ended up giving up. I just don't really actually use a tablet, and I just draw, and a lot of the artwork that I do anyway is all vector based. And so the point and click and being able to, I'm very, very precise. So like being able to manipulate the Bezier curves and the exact position of each of the points and all of that stuff, the arcs and all that stuff. I'm just, rather than being more of a free-flowing type of artist, right, where you're drawing or painting as if you're actually using a real brush, which is a lot more expressive, and you get a lot more of texture and all that stuff that comes with it. You definitely want a stylus for that because you can get a lot more fluid with your hand, but that's just not how I do things. And it comes down to because really I'm more of a graphic designer, and so I've kind of trained myself and my little hands here to work that way. So that's the way that I end up working. In terms of, are there any good tablets that I recommend? I mean, I've used Wacom tablets, which is a fantastic brand. I've used X Pen, which also works really well. But I know there's a ton of different tablets that are out there. In terms of software, it all depends on what you are creating. If you're trying to create a vector file, you'll need something that is vector based, something like Adobe Illustrator, or I know there's a whole bunch. I'm kind of have access to the Adobe Suite, so that ends up being what I'm using. But there's actually a whole lot of different types of products out there that are just like that, and that will work just great for vector based. Or if you want things that are more brush like, that feel a little bit, that are able to replicate the sense of watercolor or oil or acrylic or whatever it is that you might be painting, or pen and ink and that type of thing. You'll want something that is raster based, so something like Adobe Photoshop or like products that are out there, because those things are actually capturing pixel information rather than the postscript information, which is what the Bezier curves are actually capturing, which is an arc, and then it's filling in the in between the arc. As opposed to a vector base, which is each pixel individually is picking up some sort of color, and then when you step back, it creates the bigger picture. So it really depends on what type of illustration you're looking at and what you're trying to do. All right, next question. Can you talk about why you chose to illustrate the game in vector? Okay, so there's a number of reasons. The very first and topmost reason is because as a graphic designer, I'm very used to what I'm normally drawing are logos, logo marks, typography, things that require very extreme precision, and they also need to be vector based because they need to be able to scale and be able to print in all sorts of different formats and do all sorts of different things. And so it's kind of the thing that I do is vector based design work. And so on one side, it's the way that I illustrate, and it's the way that I love to illustrate, and it's the way that I approach most things is through a vector style. So number one, it's kind of a natural fit for like, if I'm going to illustrate a game, it's probably going to be that way. Now, if Oros were a 600 card game or something like that, where every card needed to have unique artwork, doing vector illustrations is just so inefficient. It just wouldn't work, right? And you'd probably want things that are a little bit more painterly, a little bit more expressive, that felt a little bit more feel like you're inside some sort of fantasy world or something that's else. But because of the theme of Oros and also just the nature of the components that are required to play the game, the artwork really is, a map, which is very simple. It's just water, right? And there's a few little islands, and then there's land, and land is rolling hills and trees and mountains and other spots of water and things like that, rivers and things like that. And so just the nature of what the artwork is, and because it didn't have to, like, the artwork itself didn't need to tell the story, at least for like a lot of the component things. The game itself is the story rather than the artwork like being the story, and then you're like entering the story through playing the game. So it just kind of worked out that because of how how Oros is put together, it works really well. And the exception to that, of course, are the player mats, where we have an actual character and they're in a setting, and there's a whole lot of different design decisions and reasons around why they are designed the way they are and why they're set up the way that they are. Well, I'm sure we'll get into that through other questions, but the reason, another reason to illustrate in vector was because it's not commonly used in board games. And so when people see the game on the shelf, there's something about it. And even if somebody can't really recognize what that thing is, there's something about it that says like, that seems a little different than the other games that feel very fantasy or that feel very rough or grungy or have a lot of texture. This game looks different. It's very modern and feels very sleek and clean, and the vector style is what's making it look that way. And so there's also a story there of making sure that it has a good shelf presence and it looks unique within the sea of all the different board game choices that are out there today. Next question. Do you think your ability to play all these many parts, game creator, designer, writer, etc., has made the artwork what it is? And if so, how? Oh, that's good. Okay, so it's very true, and absolutely, like my playing the role of the designer of the game, the graphic designer, the writer, the one who's writing up the rule book, doing all the iconography. Having done all of those things, those little micro decisions help inform each other. And so absolutely, I'm sure that like all of the artwork, the way that the things are illustrated, the colors that are used, even if you look very closely, there's a lot of round and rolling moments through the artwork that translates directly into all of the UI that's on the player mats and things like that. And it's created this sense that all of this stuff is very, very cohesive. And so it's absolutely, doing the design work as well as the game design work, which I guess there could be something there too with, the game itself is the very simple actions, but the implications of those actions are pretty deep. And there are a lot of levels to how those actions can be carried out and what they can do for you, or thinking about things sideways, where you might be like, well, I was going to do this, but if I think this other way, I could actually achieve this other thing that actually might be better for me. And so there's a lot that goes into playing the game. And so trying to make sure that things are simple in terms of how things read on the player mat and the artwork, it was really important to make all that stuff feel very minimal and very little effort, as little effort as possible for a player to interact with. So that way all of their focus ends up being on playing the game. and doing the cognitive process of creatively coming up with how they're going to respond to how the map changed or how they're going to achieve this or that objective, rather than spending the time trying to decipher a player mat or decipher what this thing means or what that thing does. And so there's definitely a connection there as well. Okay, next question. How did you manage to make the artwork highly thematic and super clean in terms of reading it, both at the same time? Okay, so talked a little bit about why, but like how to make that work. So if you look at the player boards, the artwork for each of the demigods in the player boards, you'll notice that the demigods themselves are actually very static, and each one of them is framed by something which draws your eyes to that character. And then each of the environments around the characters also have elements that are pulling inward toward the main character. And so everything in terms of the artwork on the player mats, it's all kind of focusing around and coming right back to that character. So that's a compositional decision that was made to make sure that those characters were always the focus there, and everything else around it is just supporting that main focus. And the people themselves, they're all static. If you notice, they're all standing on 2 feet, right? Like none of them are jumping through the air, holding some blazing sword, smashing skulls, or doing something really extreme. All of them are static. And that's, again, as an intentional decision. So the artwork has this sense of, first off, there's a sense of calm, a sense of zen about all of the artwork, that nothing is like high octane or aggressive in any way. And it's also meant to kind of cite what artwork looks like on an ancient Babylonian pottery shard, or on the wall, mosaic on the wall of an Egyptian temple, or the ruins of a Mayan structure. These ancient art forms were very, very static and grounded, and also very flat feeling. And because of the theme of Oros and how it relates so closely to so many ancient themes, the artwork is also doing that same thing, right? It's reaching out and it's kind of finding inspiration from those ancient forms of artwork, and also becoming embedded into the artwork of the game. And so, I mean, obviously there's color, and there's it's bright and it's vibrant, and it's visually interesting and fun to look at. But you can definitely see things that are like, oh yeah, that's very grounded and very, very much like an ancient type of thing would be, rather than something that's more of a Baroque or a more expressive style, where horses are rearing up on their rear legs, and all sorts of crazy things are happening. And I think that also fits with the theme of the whole game's about searching for knowledge and getting knowledge. It's not an aggressive theme at all. And again, that's also very intentional. It's meant to be a very calm theme, and which then focuses everything back on the creativity of the players, and the puzzling things out and decide and figuring out things that they can do that in the game, rather than the action and adventure of other games, which again makes it kind of a unique game. Okay, next question. All right, the final designs have a blend of nature, symbols, iconography, as well as the unique demigods. So can you talk a little bit about how you developed the visual style for the game, and how you made it cohesive across all of the elements? All right, so I guess I've kind of already answered this a little bit, but it also relates to the graphic design. And so, as being the graphic designer for the game as well as the illustrator, what happens often with games as they're being developed is, someone has developed the game and a publisher picks that up, right? So all of the nuances, all those little nuggets that happen during the playtesting and the game design process don't get transferred, right? A game gets transferred, and now if there's a new interpretation, and a publisher then hires an artist, or 2 or 4, or some games have like 14 artists, and then they'll hire a graphic designer, and they'll hire a rulebook editor, and they'll hire all these people to do all this work. And so since I'm doing all of those parts, and I've been able to play the role of all of those different things, I've been able to say, okay, I need to be able to describe this concept this way in the rule book. So what's the best way to visually describe that as an icon on the player mat? And how does that relate to how the mechanic works on the map? Right. And piecing all of those things together. And even and how does that relate to the artwork as it's represented, at the top of the top artwork across the top of the player mat. And so because there's this interconnection between all of those things, the style for all of the little icons, or even the little icons for each of the different little factions for the demigods and the followers, they all relate to what the iconography on the player mat that explains the different actions and abilities, and that relates to the little icons that are on the mountain tiles, and that and so anyway, all of those things are very connected. And so again, looking for a very minimal style that helps to simplify all of those things that are meant to be informative in the game. And so again, so the player doesn't have to process all of that information. What they get to process is the fun part. How do I play the game? And how do I make smart decisions while playing the game, right? So less deciphering and more deciding on strategies and things like that. And so there you have it. All right, and then this last question is really a bonus question because I threw it in here just for all those people, all 2 or 3 of you who may have actually made it to the end of this video. Are there any fun surprises for the artwork? So I'm going to throw this little Easter egg out there for anybody who sticks it out to the end. I do have a big plan for the game and all the artwork because being the artist gives me the flexibility to affect the artwork and to change it without having to reach back out and recontract and go through all these rounds of edits. And so, as part of the campaign, we're going to open the doors to ask people to supply ideas for little objects or little items or whatever it is, as long as it's on theme and appropriate. We want to be able to create, or what I want to do is create a hunt and find through all of the artwork, all the different components, the tiles, the map, the player mats, the box, anything, the rule book, any place where there's artwork. We're going to hide little things all over the place. And so we're going to ask for suggestions from people and then have social goals to figure out how many different items we're going to hide. And we're going to put Easter eggs all over this thing. And it's going to be a whole, once you get the game, yes, you can play the game, but there's this whole separate activity that you'll be able to do in finding all the different items that are in there. So hush, hush, but wink, wink, it's going to be a good time. So if you have ideas about fun things that we might hide in there, get ready because we'll open a poll in our Demigods Unite Facebook group when the campaign's running, and we'll have people throwing out ideas. So start thinking now so you can put some suggestions in. All right, that's all we've got today, and we'll talk to you another time. Until then, keep on playing.